So, what is foreshadowing? Glad you asked. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Riley K. Jones. I'm a writer, teacher, and author tuber, and today we're going to be talking about foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a technique that every single book needs. I know that's a bold claim that I'm making, but every single book has an element of foreshadowing. Whether you're reading a Sherlock Holmes book, watching a movie, watching a TV show, reading a romance novel, or reading a contemporary novel, foreshadowing is important for every single story. So, what is foreshadowing? Glad you asked. Foreshadowing is hinting at something that is to come later in a work of literature. That could be a movie or a TV show, or can be a book or a short story. And foreshadowing are these little nuggets or breadcrumbs that you're kind of leaving the reader so that way when it comes to a big reveal or a lesson that is supposed to be learned by the character, they learn the lesson, and as well as your audience. It doesn't seem so out of nowhere or out of character. You are leading the audience to know that, hey, this thing is supposed to happen. When attempting to plot out your foreshadowing, or even when you're going back in revision and trying to foreshadow, it's always good to follow the rule of 3. What is the rule of 3? The rule of 3 is typically a pattern. 3 is one of the smallest numbers required to create a pattern. So 3 comes in many different forms. You might have heard of the 3-act structure, beginning, middle, end. You might have heard of good things or bad things come in 3s. 3s is a solid number that you can use to establish a set pattern. The rule of 3 also, it really comes into play in drama. So in drama, there is this mentioning of if there's a key piece of information, you want to have the character say at least 3 times in the play. The reason is to, 1, allow the audience to understand that that is important information. 2, you never know if someone's going to cough or sneeze or chaos breaks loose or someone is talking to them, their cell phone goes off. You never know if they're going to miss that other time, but if you were able to catch it, you're like, oh, that's a pattern. We're seeing a pattern now. That's coming into play. So foreshadowing doesn't always, but should follow a type of rule of 3. What I mean by this is you should have at least 3, but you can have more, but do be wary of overkill. For example, in Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, the character TJ mentions this item, the pearl-handled pistol, at least 3 times before the climax occurs. This mentioning of the pistol brings you to the climax. There's 3 times he mentions it and how he wants to have this gun. So much so, he's willing to trade his life for it. And then at the climax, we see the gun again, and it's like, oh, why didn't he get rid of the gun? So that is an example of, yes, there's a rule of 3 before the climax, and it's good to have that before climax, especially if we're writing a type of mystery, which, to be honest, all stories have an element of mystery in them. But having that rule of 3 kind of leaves that hint to the reader that, oh, that's going to come into play later. We really need that information for later. And sometimes that 3rd time that it's mentioned can be brought up in that revealing. You don't always have to have 3 consecutive times. You should have at least 3 times throughout, and that could be multiple different clues and foreshadowings that you can provide. And that which leads me to my next point is layers of foreshadowing. So foreshadowing in a book, in a novel, in a play, in a show, in a short story, any of those mediums, it doesn't have to be the same exact thing or mentioned in the same exact way. It could be a variance of that thing mentioned. For example, like maybe there's a gun reference that's connected to the reveal, like in Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. he keeps mentioning this gun and wanting this gun, which then brings about his demise and his downfall. But maybe there's something different. Maybe it's a catchphrase that a character says. Maybe it's the way a character behaves that really demonstrates that specific thing, reveal that you're trying to create. When you have a great reveal, it's because there's been multiple layers of foreshadowing threaded throughout the novel that come together all at once, and you're like, ah, bam, mind blown, that's what happened. So if you ever seen the movie Knives Out, I'm going to spoil something, so if you haven't seen this film, I highly recommend it. Go watch that and then come back to this video. So in Knives Out, we're following the murder mystery of Harlan Thrombey, and we have seen through the perspective of his nurse who comes in and takes care of him, and he's a really rich, wealthy murder mystery novelist who is killed in his home and no one knows why. And it seems to us that it was the nurse who accidentally murdered him, but the movie does a great job with foreshadowing little bits and clues by mentioning things like the knives that are in the set. You have the knives that they're all sitting behind during the interviews with the family trying to figure out what's happening, and they come into play again at the end. And the greatest part of foreshadowing is his grandfather mentions that Ransom would never recognize a real knife from a prop knife, and at that time he's playing with it. And it seems so natural, so subtle, that you're just going on and you're just like, cool, this is great, but who killed this guy? And then when at the great reveal we realize it was Ransom, which there's so much foreshadowing leading up to that. But this moment's awesome because he goes and he grabs this knife from this scene and he goes to stab our main character, and he fails because it was a prop knife. And he doesn't even recognize that. And it's just such a great moment of foreshadowing because most people probably did not remember it, but some people did, and they were just like, oh my gosh, it's that. And some people might have been like, what? We're confused. But I would say the majority were like, as soon as it revealed that like that wasn't a real knife, you're like, oh yeah, his grandfather mentioned that. So layers of foreshadowing is always great. And my third thing for you when you're crafting your foreshadowing is that it's okay if the foreshadowing is subtle. And actually, subtlety is great to have those under the rug comments of making it all seem part of your world, making it all seem natural in conversation. Nothing seems too forced. It just kind of flows out so that when you get that reveal, it's like, aha, I get it. Like this is how it was started. So you don't want to have everything to be just bland in your face. You as a writer might be like, oh, it might feel that way. But like as I was doing my revision recently for author mentor match, I thought all my foreshadowing was super in your face because I knew about it. And typically when you know about the foreshadowing and you go back, it might be a little bit more in your face and you can pick up on it faster. But when it's your first time through, you're not really thinking about that too much. So it's okay to be subtle as long as you then play off of that breadcrumb, that trail, that hint, and you reveal it later. And like these items, these foreshadowing, these breadcrumbs don't really necessarily have to interact with each other until that reveal. It's fine to mention something explicitly at times, but when you have to bring that up, it's okay to just be subtle about it, mention it, slide it in there under the rug, and nobody will typically, it won't be this bam in your face moment, and people will just pick up on it and be like, oh, That's an interesting piece of information. And then later be like, oh, that's why that was mentioned. It should be subtle, it should be succinct, but it should not give away the whole plot. For example, if you have read the book Hunting November, I'm going to throw out a spoiler here. So if you're like, I want to read this book and I haven't read it, just skip ahead at least 2 minutes and you should be fine. But in Hunting November, there is this mysterious ferryman that has been hinted and mentioned throughout just Hunting November. And then at the same time, throughout the book, we're traveling through November's perspective, and she's realizing that she doesn't know her father as well as she thought she did. And all the clues that he's on the run, she can't find him, and all the clues that all the clues he's leaving behind doesn't seem to add up to what her father is. So she's dealing with these two problems, and this random mentioning of the ferryman, just kind of like, oh, he's terrible, he's scary, we want to avoid him. And then her father being seeming strange and out of character, as well as mentionings of him just kind of being gone at periods of time, which she just always assumed he was just traveling and visiting with family members. So although, like, now that I'm bringing those two examples up, you might be thinking, oh, I can put two and two together. Her father is the ferryman, which is like, psh, when you're reading it though, you don't put two and two together until November puts two and two together. And it's just so well done. And all it is just little sprinklings here and there and mentioning it. And I'm not sure how many times the ferryman is mentioned. Definitely at least more than 3 times, as well as her father is mentioned more than 3 times. But it's probably about 3, but they're always just kind of, here and there, not no big deal until the reveal. And so, like, that is a great example of layering in those foreshadowings and those clues, because that was like, oh wow, that's it, that was the whole thing. So now that you have your own rule of 3 on how and what foreshadowing to look like, how do you apply it into your writing and your writing process? Well, that is going to depend on you as a writer. Maybe you have mapped out all your writing and foreshadowing beforehand, and then you are already starting to sprinkle that foreshadowing in as you write. Maybe you are not that kind of writer and need to figure out what in the world you're trying to communicate and the plot of the book before you can even attempt foreshadowing. And that is completely okay to have written the entire first draft and go back through and sprinkle in that. I know as myself, as I've mentioned through my author mentor match, I am a bit more of a discovery writer. So as I'm discovering the mystery, I'm figuring out, oh, okay, this person is going to do this thing. So let me go back a couple chapters and just sprinkle in that little reference. There are some things that I know that I was like, oh, that is going to be key. I'm putting that in the beginning, and that's been there since the beginning of my first draft, and I'm on draft 3 now. It's okay to be wherever you are. Just know that on your finished draft, on your polished draft, to make sure that you have done those things. And just know that you can always come back to a revision and tighten those threads and sprinkle in that foreshadowing as needed. I hope this video has been helpful for you to understand a little bit more about what foreshadowing is and how to incorporate it into your writing. And if you have a favorite example of foreshadowing, let me know in the comments below what that is. Just please try not to have too much spoilers. If you have a spoiler, please put a spoiler alert so that we are being sensitive to other people who may not have read those things before reading the spoilers. So try to make it spoiler free as much as possible, but if you need to have spoilers, just let us know in the comments below. If you liked this video, please make sure to give this video a nice big thumbs up to let me know and the algorithm know that you like videos like this one. And if you haven't already, click subscribe. I release new videos on all things writing and reading every Thursday. Thank you guys so much for watching. Keep writing, keep reading, and stay creative. Bye!